Hello. Ooh, microphone. You'd think after 9 weeks I'd know to have the microphone near me. Hello, 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 and welcome to the Aurora Bedtime Story Project. I'm Chris Voss. Hope you're having a good Tuesday, May 12 already, if you can believe that. Every weeknight we're right here from the Canopy Room in Somerville, Massachusetts, doing bedtime story readings. And since late April, it's been one book in particular, The Secret Garden. And we're pretty close to the end to this beautiful book. 2 more chapters today. Then they're doing some work here in Canopy tomorrow again, so no story tomorrow. And then the final chapter, just one chapter, and that will be on Thursday. And then we'll see what comes next. So, before we get started with the next 2 chapters, and again, they're beautiful chapters. I just love how this book gets more beautiful and beautiful as it goes on, as you go along. But before we get to that, it's time for a deep breath. We do this every night as well. Just get a little focused, All right, ready? 1, 2, 3. Chapter 25 of The Secret Garden, The Curtain. And the secret garden bloomed, and every morning revealed new miracles. In the robin's nest there were eggs, and the robin's mate sat upon them, keeping them warm with her feathery little breast and careful wings. At first she was very nervous, and the robin himself was indignantly watchful. Even Dickon did not go near the close-grown corner in those days, but waited until the quiet working of some mysterious spell he seemed to have conveyed to the soul of the little pair, that in the garden there was nothing which was not quite like themselves, nothing which did not understand the wonderfulness of what was happening to them, the immense, tender, terrible, heartbreaking beauty and solemnity of eggs. If there had been one person in that garden who had not known through all his or her innermost being that if an egg were taken away or hurt, the whole world would swirl around and crash through space and come to an end, if there had been even one who did not feel it and act accordingly, there could have been no happiness even in that golden springtime air. But they all knew it, and felt it, and the robin and his mate knew they knew it. At first, the robin watched Mary and Colin with sharp anxiety. For some mysterious reason, he knew he need not watch Dickon. The first moment he set his dew-bright black, and Dickon always speech, animals were thrown over him. That in itself was doubtful. Then, when he began to stand up and move about, he did it in a queer, unaccustomed way, and the others seemed to have to help him. The robin used to secret himself in a bush and watch this anxiously, his head tilted first to one side and then to the other. He thought that the slow movements might mean that he was preparing to pounce, as cats do. When cats are preparing to pounce, they creep over the ground very slowly. The robin talked this over with his mate a great deal for a few days, but after that he decided not to speak of the subject, because her terror was so great that he was afraid it might be injurious to the eggs. When the boy began to walk by himself, and even to move more quickly, it was an immense relief. But for a long time, or it seemed a long time to the robin, he was a source of some anxiety. He did not act as the other humans did. He seemed very fond of walking, but he had a way of sitting or lying down for a while and then getting up in a disconcerting manner to begin again. One day the robin remembered that when he himself had been made to learn to fly by his parents, he had done much the same sort of thing. He had taken short flights of a few yards, and then, so it occurred to him that this boy was learning to fly, or rather to walk. He mentioned this to his mate, and when he told her that the eggs would probably conduct themselves in the same way after they were fledged, she was quite comforted, and even became eagerly interested and derived great pleasure from watching the boy over the edge of her nest, though she always thought that the eggs would be much cleverer and learn more quickly. But then she said indulgently that humans were always more clumsy and slow than eggs, and most of them never seemed really to learn to fly at all. You never met them in the air or on treetops. After a while, the boy began to move about as the others did, but all three of the children, at times, did unusual things. They would stand under the trees and move their arms and legs and heads about in a way which was neither walking nor running nor sitting down. They went through these movements at intervals every day, and the robin was never able to explain to his mate what they were doing or trying to do. He could only say that he was sure that the eggs would never flap about in such a manner. But as the boy who could speak robin fluently was doing the same with them, birds could be quite sure that the actions were not of a dangerous sort. Of course, neither the robin nor his mate had ever heard of the champion wrestler Bob Howarth and his exercises for making the muscles stand out like lumps. Robins are not like human beings. Their muscles are always exercised from the first, and so they develop themselves in a natural manner. If you have to fly about to find every meal you eat, your muscles do not become atrophied. Atrophied means wasted away through want of use. When the boy was walking and running about and digging and weeding like the others, the nest in the corner was brooded over by a great peace and contentment. Fears for the eggs became things of the past. Knowing that your eggs were as safe as if they were locked in a bank vault, and the fact that you could watch so many curious things going on, made sitting a most entertaining occupation. On wet days, the eggs' mother sometimes felt even a little dull because the children did not come into the garden. But even on wet days, it could not be said that Mary and Colin were dull. One morning when the rain streamed down unceasingly and Colin was beginning to feel a little restive, as he was obliged to remain on his sofa because it was not safe to get up and walk about, Mary had an inspiration. "Now that I'm a real boy," Colin had said, "my legs and arms and all my body are so full of magic that I can't keep them still. They want to be doing things all of the time. Do you know that when I wake morning, Mary, when it's quite early and the birds are just shouting outside and everything seems shouting for joy, even the trees and things we can't really hear, I feel as if I must jump out of bed and shout myself. And if I did it, just think what would happen." Mary giggled inordinately. "Well, the nurse would come running, and Mrs. Medlock would come running, and they would be sure you had gone crazy, and they'd send for the doctor," she said. Colin giggled himself. He could see how they would all look, how horrified by his outbreak, and how amazed to see him standing upright. "I wish my father would come home," he said. "I want to tell him myself. I'm always thinking about it. But we couldn't go on like this much longer. I can't stand lying still and pretending. And besides, I look too different. Oh, I wish it wasn't raining today." It was then that Mistress Mary had her inspiration. "Colin," she said mysteriously, "do you know how many rooms there are in this house?" "About 1,000, I suppose," he answered. "There's about 100 no one ever goes into," said Mary. "And one rainy day I went and looked into ever so many of them. No one ever knew, though Mrs. Medlock nearly found me out. I lost my way when I was coming back, and I stopped at the end of your corridor. That was the second time I heard you crying." Colin started up on his sofa. 100 rooms no one ever goes into," he said. "It sounds almost like a secret garden. Suppose we go and look at them. You could wheel me in my chair and, well, nobody would know where we went." "That's what I was thinking," said Mary. "No one would dare to follow us. There are galleries where you could run. We could do our exercises. There is a little room where there's a cabinet full of ivory elephants. There are all sorts of rooms." "Ring the bell," said Colin. When the nurse came, he gave his orders. "I want my chair," he said. "Miss Mary and I are going to look at the part of the house which is not used. John can push me as far as the picture gallery, because there are some stairs. Then he must go away and leave us alone until I send for him again." Rainy days lost their terrors that morning. When the footman had wheeled the chair into the picture gallery and left the two together in obedience to orders, Colin and Mary looked at each other, delighted. As soon as Mary had made sure that John was really on his way back to his own quarters below stairs, Colin got out of his chair. "I'm going to run from one end of the gallery to the other," he said, "and then I'm going to jump, and then we will do Bob Howard's exercises." And they did all those things, and many others. They looked at the portraits, and found the plain little girl dressed in green brocade and holding the parrot on her finger. "All these," said Colin, "must be my relations. They lived a long time ago. That parrot one, I believe, is one of my great-great-great-great-aunts. She looks rather like you, Mary. Well, not as you look now, but as you looked when you came here. Now you are a great deal fatter and better looking." "So are you," said Mary, and they both laughed. Then they went to the little room and amused themselves with the ivory elephants. They found the rose-colored brocade boudoir and the hole in the cushion the mouse had left, and the mice had grown up and run away, and the hole was empty. They saw more rooms and made more discoveries than Mary had made on her first pilgrimage. They found new corridors and corners and flights of steps, and new old pictures they liked, and weird old things they did not know the use of. It was a curiously entertaining morning, and the feelings of wandering about in the same house with other people, but at the same time feeling as if they were miles away from them, was a fascinating thing. "I'm glad we came," Colin said. "I never knew I lived in such a big old place. I like it. We will ramble about every rainy day. We shall always be finding new corners and things." That morning they had found, among other things, such good appetites that when they returned to Colin's room it was not possible to send the luncheon away untouched. When the nurse carried the tray downstairs, she slapped it down on the kitchen dresser so that Mrs. Loomis, the cook, could see the highly polished dishes and plates. "Look at that! This is a house of mystery, and those two children are the greatest mysteries in it." "If they keep that up every day," said the strong young footman, John, "there'd be small wonder that he weighs twice as much today as he did a month ago. I should have to give up my place and time for fear of doing my muscles an injury. That afternoon, Mary noticed that something new had happened in Colin's room. She had noticed it in the day before, but had said nothing because she thought the change might have been made by chance. She said nothing today, but she sat and looked fixedly at the picture over the mantel. She could look at it because the curtain had been drawn aside. This was the change she had noticed. "I know what you want me to tell you," said Colin, after she had stared a few minutes. "I always know when you want me to tell you something. You are wondering why the curtain is drawn back. I am going to keep it like that." "Why?" asked Mary. "Because it doesn't make me angry anymore to see her laughing. I wakened when it was bright moonlight 2 nights ago and felt as if the magic was filling the room and making everything so splendid that I couldn't lie still. I got up and looked out of the window. The room was quite light and there was a patch of moonlight on the curtain, and somehow that made me go and pull the cord. My mother looked right down at me as if she were laughing because she was glad I was standing there. It made me like to look at her. I want to see her laughing like that all the time. I think she must have been a sort of magic person, perhaps." "You are so like her now," said Mary, "that sometimes I think perhaps you are her ghost made into a boy." That idea seemed to impress Colin. He thought it over, and then answered her slowly. "If I were her ghost," he said, "my father would be fond of me." "Do you want him to be fond of you?" inquired Mary. "I used to hate it because he was not fond of me. If he grew fond of me, I think I should tell him about the magic. It might make him more cheerful." Chapter 26. Its mother. Their belief in the magic was an abiding thing. After the morning's incantations, Colin sometimes gave them magic lectures. "I like to do it," he explained, "because when I grow up and make great scientific discoveries, I shall be obliged to lecture about them, and so this is practice. I can only give short lectures now because I am very young, and besides, Ben Weatherstaff would feel as if he was in church, and he would go to sleep." "The best thing about lecturing," said Ben, "is that a chap can get in and up and say aught he pleases, and no other chap can answer him back. I wouldn't be again lecturing a bit myself sometime." But when Colin held forth under his tree, old Ben fixed devouring eyes on him and kept them there. He looked him over with critical affection. It was not so much the lecture which interested him as the legs which looked straighter and stronger each day, the boyish head which held itself up so well, the once sharp chin and hollow cheeks which had filled and rounded out, and the eyes which had begun to hold the light he remembered in another pair. Sometimes, when Colin felt Ben's earnest gaze, he was much impressed, and he wondered what Ben was reflecting on. And once, when he had seemed quite entranced, Colin asked him. "What are you thinking about, Ben Weatherstaff?" he asked. "I was thinking," answered Ben, "as I'd warrant tha's gone up 3 or 4 pound this week. I was looking at the calves and the shoulders. I'd like to get thee on a pair of scales." "It's the magic. And Well, and Mrs. Sowerby's buns and milk and things, said Colin. You see, the scientific experiment has succeeded. That morning Dickon was too late to hear the lecture. When he came, he was ruddy with running, and his funny face looked more twinkling than usual. As they had a good deal of weeding to do after the rains, they fell to work. They always had plenty to do after the warm, deep-sinking rain. The moisture, which was good for the flowers, was also good for the weeds, which thrust up tiny blades of grass and points of leaves, which must be pulled up before their roots took too firm hold. Colin was as good at weeding as anyone else these days, and he could lecture while he was doing it. The magic works best when you work yourself, he said this morning. You can feel it in your bones and your muscles. I am going to read books about bones and muscles, but I am going to write a book about magic. I'm making it up now. I keep finding out things. It was not very long after he had said this that he laid down his trowel and stood up on his feet. He had been silent for several minutes, and they had seen that he was thinking out lectures, as he often did. When he dropped his trowel and stood upright, it seemed to Mary and Dickon as if a sudden strong thought had made him do it. He stretched himself out to his tallest height and threw out his arms exultantly. Color glowed in his face, and his strange eyes widened with joyfulness. All at once, he had realized something to the full. Mary! Dickon! He cried. Just look at me! They stopped their weeding and looked at him. Do you remember that first morning you brought me here? He demanded. Dickon was looking at him very hard. Being an animal charmer, he could see more things than most people could, and many of them were things he never talked about. He saw some of them now in this boy. Aye, that we do, he answered. Mary looked hard too, but she said nothing. Well, just this minute, said Colin, all at once, I remembered it myself, when I looked at my hand digging with the trowel, and I had to stand up on my feet to see if it was real. And it is real. I'm well. I'm well. Aye, that thou art, said Dickon. I'm well, I'm well, I'm well, said Colin again, and his face went quite red all over. He had known it before in a way. He had hoped it, and felt it, and thought about it, but just at that minute something had rushed all through him, a sort of rapturous belief and realization, and it had been so strong that he could not help calling out. I shall live forever and ever and ever, he cried grandly. I shall find out thousands and thousands of things. I shall find out about people and creatures and everything that grows, like Dickon, and I shall never stop making magic. I am well, I can feel it, as if I want to shout out something thankful and joyful. Ben Weatherstaff, who had been working near a rose bush, glanced round at him. "Thou might sing the doxology," he suggested in his driest grunt. He had no opinion of the doxology, and he did not make the suggestion with any particular reverence. But Colin was of an exploring mind, and he knew nothing about the doxology. "What is that?" he inquired. "Dickon can sing it for thee, I'll warrant," replied Ben Weatherstaff. Dickon answered with his all-perceiving animal charmer smile. "They sing it in church," he said. "Mother says she believes the skylarks sing it when they gets up in the morning." "If she says that, "It must be a nice song," Colin answered. "I've never been in a church myself. I was always too ill." "Sing it, Dickon. I want to hear it." Dickon was quite simple and unaffected about it. He understood that Colin felt better than Colin did himself. He understood by a sort of instinct so natural that he did not know it was understanding. He pulled off his cap and looked round, still smiling. "Thou must take off thy cap," he said to Colin, "and so mun thou, Ben, and thou mun stand up thy nose." Colin took off his cap, and the sun shone on the warm, thick hair as he watched Dickon intently. Ben Weatherstaff scrambled up from his knees and bared his head too, with a sort of puzzled, half-resentful look on his old face, as if he didn't know exactly why he was doing this remarkable thing. Dickon stood out among the trees and rose bushes and began to sing in a quiet, simple, matter-of-fact way, and in a nice, strong boy's voice. "God praise from whom all blessings flow. Praise him, all creatures here below. Praise him above, ye heavenly hosts. Praise Father, Son, and Holy Ghost. Amen." When he had finished, Ben Weatherstaff was standing quite still, with his jaws set obstinately, but with a disturbed look in his eyes fixed on Colin. Colin's face was thoughtful and appreciative. "It is a very nice song," he said. "I like it. Perhaps it means just what I mean when I want to shout that I am thankful to the magic." He stopped and thought in a puzzled way. Perhaps they are both the same thing. How can we know the exact names of everything? "Sing it again, Dickon. Let us try, Mary. I want to sing it, too. It's my song. How does it begin? Praise God from whom all blessings flow?" And they sang it again. And Mary and Colin lifted their voices as musically as they could, and Dickens swelled quite loud and beautiful. And at the second line, Ben Weatherstaff raspily cleared his throat, and at the third he joined in, with such vigor that it seemed almost savage. And when the Amen came at the end, Mary observed that the very same thing that happened to him when he had found out that Colin was not a cripple was happening now. His chin was twitching, and he was staring and winking, and his leathery old cheeks were wet. "I never seed no sense in the doxology before," he said hoarsely, "but I may change my mind in time. I should say that gone up £5 this week, Mr. Colin, 5 on 'em." Colin was looking across the garden at something, attracting his attention, and suddenly his expression had become a startled one. "Who is coming in here?" he said quickly. "Who is it?" The door in the ivied wall had been pushed gently open. Through the trees and dappling her long blue cloak, and her nice fresh face smiling across the greenery, she was rather like a softly colored illustration in one of Colin's books. She had wonderful, affectionate eyes which seemed to take everything in, all of them, even Ben Weatherstaff, and the creatures, and every flower that was in bloom. "Ah, that's who it is," he cried, and he went across the grass at a run. Colin began to move towards her too, and Mary went with him. They both felt their pulses beat faster. "It's Mother," Dickon said again when they met halfway. I knowed I wanted to see her, and I told her where the door was hid. Colin held out his hand with a sort of flushed royal shyness, but his eyes quite devoured her face. Even when I was ill, I wanted to see you, he said. You and Dickon and the secret garden. I'd never wanted to see anyone or anything before. The sight of his uplifted face brought about a sudden change in her own. She flushed, and the corners of her mouth shook, and a mist seemed to sweep over her eyes. Dear lad, she broke out tremulously. Dear lad. As if she had not known she was going to say it. She did not say, Master Colin, but just, dear lad. She might have said it to Dickon in the same way if she had been seeing something in his face which touched her. Colin loved it. Are you surprised because I am so well? He asked. She put her hand on his shoulder and smiled the mist out of her eyes. Aye, that I am, she said, but that's so like thy mother, and it made my heart jump. Do you think, said Colin a little awkwardly, that will make my father like me? Aye, for sure, dear lad, she answered, and she gave his shoulder a soft, quick pat. He mun come home. He mun come home soon. Susan Sowerby, said Ben Weatherstaff, getting close to her. Look at the lad's legs, wilt thou? They was like drumsticks in stocking 2 months ago, and I heard folk tell as they was bandy and knock-kneed both at the same time. Look at him now. Susan Sowerby laughed a comfortable laugh. They're going to be a fine, strong lad's legs in a bit, she said. Let him go playing and working in the garden and eating hearty and drinking plenty of good milk, and there'll be no finer pair in Yorkshire, thank God for it. She put both hands on Mistress Mary's shoulders next and looked her little face over in a motherly fashion. And thee too, she said, thou'rt grown near as hearty as Elizabeth Ellen. I'll warrant thou'd like thy mother too. And Martha told me as Mrs. Medlock heard she was a pretty woman. Thou'lt be like a blush rose when thou grows up, my little lass, bless thee. She did not mention that when Martha came home on her day out and described the plain, sallow child, she had said that she had no confidence whatever in what Mrs. Medlock had heard. It doesn't stand to reason that the pretty woman could be a mother of such a foul little lass, she had added obstinately. Mary had not had time to pay attention that she might some day look like her. Susan Sowerby went round their garden with them and was told the whole story of it and shown every bush and tree which had come alive. Colin walked on one side of her and Mary on the other. Each of them kept looking up at her comfortable rosy face, scarcely curious about the delightful feeling she gave them. A sort of warm, supported feeling. It seemed as if she understood them, as Dickon understood his creatures. She stooped over the flowers and talked about them as if they were children. Soot followed her and once or twice cawed at her and flew upon her shoulder as if it were Dickon's. When they told her about the robin and the first flight of the young'uns, she laughed a motherly little mellow laugh in her throat. I suppose learning 'em to fly is like learning children to walk, but I'm feared I should be all in a worrit if mine had wings instead of legs, she said. It was because she seemed such a wonderful woman in her nice moorland cottage way that at last she was told about the magic. Do you believe in magic? Asked Colin after he had explained I do hope you do. That I do, lad, she answered. I never knowed it by that name, but what does the name matter? Warn't they call it a different name in France and a different one in Germany? The same thing as set the seeds swelling and the sun shining, made thee a well lad, and it's the good thing. It isn't like us poor fools to think it matters if us is called out by our names. The big good thing doesn't stop to words, bless thee. It goes on making worlds by the millions, worlds, like us. Never thee stop believing in the big good thing and knowing the world's full of it, and call it what thee likes. Thou wert singing to it when I came into the garden. I felt so joyful, said Colin, opening his beautiful, strange eyes at her. Suddenly, I felt how different I was, how strong my arms and legs were, you know, and how I could dig and stand, and I jumped up and I wanted to shout something to anything that would listen. The magic listened when they sung the doxology. Would I listen to anything that sung? It was the joy that mattered, lad. Lad, what's name's to the joy maker? And she gave his shoulders a quick, soft pet again. She had packed a basket which held a regular feast this morning, and when the hungry hour came and Dickon brought it out from its hiding place, she sat down with them under their tree and watched them devour their food, laughing and quite gloating over their appetites. She was full of fun and made them laugh at all sorts of odd things. She told them stories in broad Yorkshire and taught them new words. She laughed as she could not help it when they told her of the increasing difficulty there was in pretending that Colin was still a fretful invalid. You see, we can't help laughing nearly all the time when we are together, explained Colin. And it doesn't sound ill at all. We try to choke it back, but it will burst out, and that sounds worse than ever. There's one thing that comes into my mind so often, said Mary, and I can scarcely ever hold in when I think of it suddenly. I keep thinking, suppose Colin's face should get like a full moon. It isn't like one yet, but it gets a tiny bit fatter every day, and suppose some morning it would look like the moon. What should we do? Bless us all. I can see there has a good bit of play acting to do, said Susan Sowerby. But thou won't have to keep it up much longer. Mester Craven'll come home, that's for sure. Do you think he will? Asked Colin. Why? Susan Sowerby chuckled softly. I suppose it'd not break thy heart if he found out before thou told him in thy own way, she said. Thou's laid awake nights planning it. I couldn't bear anyone else to tell him, said Colin. I think about different ways every day. I think I just want to run into his room. That'd be a fine start for him, said Susan Sowerby. I'd like to see his face, lad, I would that. Oh, he mun come back, that he mun. One of the things they talked of was the visit they were to make to her cottage. They planned it all. They were to drive over the moor and lunch out of doors among the heather. They would see all the 12 children and Dickon's garden, and would not come back until they were tired. Susan Sowerby got up at last to return to the house and to Mrs. Medlock. It was time for Colin to be wheeled back also. But before he got back into his chair, he stood quite close to Susan and fixed his eyes on her with a kind of bewildered adoration. And he suddenly caught hold of the fold of her blue cloak and held it fast. You were just what I wanted, he said. I wish you were my mother, as well as Dickens. All at once, Susan Sowerby bent down and drew him with her warm arms close against the bosom under the blue cloak, as if he had been Dickens' brother. The quick mist swept over her eyes. Dear lad, she said, thy own mother's in this here very garden, I do believe. She couldna keep out of it. Thy father must come back to thee. He mun. There we go. 25 and 26 of The Secret Garden. Sort of getting a little heartbroken here because we've only got one more chapter to go, and I'm loving this book so much I don't want it really to end, but I guess that's the way it is. You can always read it again, right? Well, thank you so much for joining me tonight for the Aurora Bedtime Story Project. Hope you're doing all right. I'm Chris Voss. A reminder that I won't be doing a reading tomorrow night because they're doing some work here at Canopy again, but I'll be back Thursday for the final chapter of The Secret Garden, and then we'll see what I cook up next. Be on the lookout. Put some questions out there and so forth. But be well. Big thank you to Leah Pringle as ever for letting me use the space here at the Canopy Room, and be sure to check out Safe Supply that they do here at Bow Market and that Leah organizes and runs. It's an outdoor grocery store, sort of like it's not a market, it's an outdoor grocery store, but it's sort of got a chutes and ladders feel to it, and local vendors and local produce and all that kind of stuff. It's very cool. It's Wednesdays, Saturdays, and Sundays, and you sign up for a slot, and you come during that slot. And I believe they have some walk-ins on Wednesdays usually. So anyway, check them out. You can find the Canopy Room at Bow Market on Facebook and on Instagram. All the information is there. All right. Hope you have a great rest of your night. And from the cozy little reading nook here at Canopy to wherever it is you are. Sleep well. See you tomorrow. Or Thursday. We'll see you Thursday.